Book Talk begins at 7 minutes and 13 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 620. Like Shakespeare, but French. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by its listeners. Well, hello. How are you? I'm really pretty darn tired right now. We found out that I very likely have long COVID, which explains an awful lot of weird things that have been happening. One of the things that it means is I'm going slower than I ever have before, which is weird and creepy, as you might imagine. So if you write to me and it takes me a while to get back to you, just know that I am really trying, but it's certainly making it hard to get another job. So even if it takes me a little while, CraftLit is definitely my focus right now, as is the Etsy shop. We have a couple of new items that are going up in the Etsy shop this week. We have some really cute mugs that Eric has designed, which I adore and I'm ordering, and a planner, which sounds kind of weird, but right now there are tons of downloadable planner pages that are available on Etsy. And I've looked at a bunch of them and none of them are designed for brains like mine. And so I've, been doing my rabbit hole research and I've created a packet of downloadable printables that might be useful to you or to someone you know who has pachinko ball brain like I do. But because we are a community that communicates, I like how I did that. It also means that if you take a look at it and you see something missing that you think would be useful, let me know. You can call at 206-350-1642, or you can email heather@craftlit.com. And I am more than happy to take requests from you guys for things that would help with the planner pages. But I'm very excited about them, and I really do hope that they help. We had last week our first book club night, and I know I got messages from several of you saying, I really tried to make it, but life interferes. I get it. I really get it. And we can pick up some of the Women in the Library when we do our next book in August. But this month, being an odd month, means that anyone at the Mina Harker level or above on Patreon, we're going to have a movie night, and y'all voted, and we're going to do A Face in the Crowd. This is the Andy Griffiths movie that is unlike anything you've ever seen Andy Griffiths do before or after. So it really shows you the guy had range. It's a shame that he got plugged into such long-running TV shows because he really had a lot more to offer. So that will be not the last Thursday this month because I am going to be at the beach. And instead, that means that we're going to be doing it July 20th. So that will be our movie night, and we'll put that over on the Patreon page as well. That week that follows, the last week of July, I may, because of brain fog and everything else, I may actually have to take that week off and not record anything. I don't know if I'll be able to do two episodes the week before. So, all right, I think that's all the housekeeping. Oh no, last housekeeping. Indiana Jones. We went to an actual theater and watched the Indiana Jones movie, and I am not going to give away spoilers. I highly recommend, if you are of a certain age and were a certain kind of young when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, that you keep away from spoilers as well and just go see the movie. The kids walking out of the theater, the kids were like bubbling because they got to experience what we experienced with Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's fun. It's fast. It's an adventure. It's also very funny and heartwarming. And oh my goodness, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is fan-freaking-tastic. Not that we're surprised, because everything she touches seems to be really, really good. And this is no exception. She's a wonderful pairing with Harrison Ford. And yeah, enjoy it. Okay, last piece of housekeeping. I did forget this. We have a raffle winner for the Baby Knits from Around the World book, and that is Mikhail R. Mikhail, I will have, by the time you get this, I will have already contacted you to let you know that you won and to make sure that I have the right address so that I can send you a copy of the book. I am so excited. Our raffle for this month, for July, is a book called Easy Knits for Beautiful Yarns. I first saw this book when I was at a New Jersey Sheep and Wool fair last September, October, with Candy. And I've been really, really happy with the patterns in this book. They are easy to follow, well edited, and the pictures are lovely. And the girl who wrote the book, she also dyes yarn, and her yarns are also just lovely. I already started on my second version of the cloche hat that she has in the book. So well worth taking a look at online. And if you're interested in joining the raffle, you can follow the link in the show notes. All right, the book. So these chapters, when I first read through them, I thought, oh, these aren't very complicated. This is easy. But there was a surprising number of sub-references that I realized upon a second or third listen that I didn't really understand. So I did my usual, it certainly takes me longer than I expected, research to find out some answers for you in advance and a couple of things that we'll talk about at the end. First, you will hear the word cabinet used. It means office. And it's just like in Hamlet, how Hamlet meets his mother in her closet, which is really her dressing room or a side room. Cabinet here, like a cabinet secretary. It's just an office. Early on in chapter 14, there is a fabulous description of a man with an imperial beard and mustaches. This is another phrase for Van Dyke, a Van Dyke beard. And the kind of mustaches that they're referring to are the twirly ones, not the double fabulous Kenneth Branagh, Hercule Poirot mustaches. But actually, if you look at the old Michael York, Richard Chamberlain, Three Musketeers, they got the beard and the mustaches correct in that. I, however, because I am me, have found photographs, or at least paintings, of appropriate things that relate to this, including some examples from the army, including the fact that the Amish shave their upper lip in America, because up until the time there were gas masks, men were expected to have a full beard if they were fighting, which actually makes a ridiculous amount of sense, right? Because who wants to waste your time shaving when there are people trying to kill you? I mean, really. The problem was when gas masks were needed during World War I, you couldn't get a good seal around your mouth and nose area if you had a beard. So that's when clean-shaven soldiers started. The Amish, because they are nonviolent in their beliefs, wanted to make a distinction between themselves, men with beards, and military men, men with full beards and mustaches, which I thought was kind of interesting. So now you know too. There is also a description of this man with the fabulous beard and mustaches wearing buff riding boots that still have dust on them. And at first I thought, well, geez, buff colored, that's like, one step away from white. That seems like a bad idea for riding boots, unless, of course, you were extremely wealthy. So I went and looked this up. And actually, this kind of buff riding boot is what we most commonly would think of as pirate boots, although those are usually black, but they would come up to the knee or close to the knee. And that's what you would wear when you were riding. When you were in town, you would fold that upper section over and you'd get those kind of just below the knee, slouchy looking boots. And if you remember having looked up any of the knitting that's available to see in the Victorian Albert Museum, there's a rather famous pair of silk stockings that are boot stockings that are shaped like these kinds of boots. Because if you're going to spend all that time and money getting the boots, you should get socks that fit. And then the socks would actually fold down over. When you folded the boot down for city wear, you would fold the stocking over the top so the decorative edge would show. Often we see, in fact, I think Richard Chamberlain's costume in The Three Musketeers as Aramis, I believe he has a lace top over his folded down boots. But buff leather was, in fact, a thing. It probably came from Cordoba. Just like people used to go to Edinburgh to be trained in medicine, people used to go to Cordoba, Spain to learn how to make really, really good leather shoes and boots. So there it is. There's a really fabulous description of Richelieu that comes just after the buff boots section. And Dumas makes some interesting comments. And this is why the episode is called like Shakespeare, but French. Dumas is writing after the French Revolution. There's clearly been a lot of changes to the country since Louis XIII was running things with Richelieu. Got it. That's a given, right? Well, with Shakespeare's writing for a Tudor queen. And so most of his history plays were designed to legitimize the Tudor claim to the throne, which meant that some otherwise pretty decent kings got vilified. And because Shakespeare is more famous than history books, we all think that Richard II was a hunchback and killed his nephews. But if you read Josephine Tey's book, The Daughter of Time, you will find out probably not so much. But one of the comments about Richelieu that Dumas makes is that we're talking about the younger, more vital, more vibrant Richelieu, not, as he puts it, the old man who was buried in his armchair. And at first I thought, okay, well, that's just bizarre. I mean, would you put the armchair vertical in the grave and bury him that, or would you lay the armchair? I could not figure out what was going on. I went and looked at a picture of Richelieu's tomb, and he is kind of reclining. It's a Pieta-style tomb sculpture. I thought, oh, maybe that's what Dumas is thinking about. But then I went back and looked at it again and slapped myself on the forehead, because I think what he's saying is by the time Richelieu was an older man, he had been working his tuchus off to keep France together. And Louis XIII and he actually worked really, really well together. There's a lot of mustache twirling and kind of villainous stuff that gets attributed to Richelieu, and a lot of I'm a dork and kind of stupid stuff that gets attached to Louis XIII. Neither of those are completely accurate. It doesn't mean that Richelieu wasn't ruthless at times, but he really did focus on the king and getting France back together. The biggest mistake he seems to have made is that he really worked hard to centralize the power of the king, which then becomes Louis the Sun King and an absolute monarch, and then you start getting into trouble. But Richelieu, as a Catholic, was also kind of interesting because while he had it in for the Huguenots, there's no question about that. And we will continue, including in these chapters, to hear about La Rochelle and the siege of La Rochelle. And it was ugly, and the Huguenots lost badly, and the Huguenots were Protestants. Richelieu didn't actually have a problem with Protestants. He worked with Protestants all the time in other leaders from other countries. However, in the Edict of Nantes, which was during Louis XIII's father, Henri IV, that edict, I'm going to really simplify this, basically granted the Huguenots the ability to have their own armed forces inside France. So they're sort of French citizens, but they're also sort of their own military presence. Richelieu did not like this at all. That was his biggest problem with the Huguenots in France. So that puts a very different spin on a lot of the things that he did, I think. And actually, honest to God, made a whole lot more sense to me, because that also makes a lot more sense when you find out that Richelieu did not grow up thinking he was going to be a mover and shaker within the world of the Catholic Church. He originally went to military school. His older brother was the one who was supposed to go into Catholic clergy and then became a monk, which means you can't hold any kind of office. So Richelieu stepped up, changed from military school into religious education. And that is why I think his tactical maneuvering for Louis XIII is so solid. And I found pictures to give you an idea of all of this that are in the show notes, including a late portrait of Richelieu of him sitting in an armchair. Now, he got very sick at the end. He and Louis XIII both got very sick at the end. By the end of his life, he was more or less entombed in his armchair, just writing. And it's a kind of a sad end to a really vital, not just vital to French history, but vital in that kind of active vitality thing. Louis XIII, just to give you an idea, he eventually died of tuberculosis of the intestines, which is a thing. And it's one of the reasons why it would be great if more places tested sewage water for communicable diseases. There are some cities in the United States that test for polio. We don't test everywhere for polio. And as a consequence, we think we don't have any polio in this country. So not true. Testing wastewater, such a good idea. Because there are a lot of things like tuberculosis that can also be carried in the gut. I always thought of it as a lung thing only. Nope. Louis probably had developed Crohn's disease towards the end. He really, really, really was not okay. He was just skin and bones. But on top of that, I just wanted to give you a statistic that blew my brain. During the last 2 years of his life, Louis received from his doctor 34 bloodlettings. That's about 20 ounces per letting. 250 purges, which is exactly what you think. It's taking an emetic and vomiting big time. And 1,200 enemas, which isn't it? I mean, it isn't as weird as it sounds because everybody was doing it. It was kind of the vogue at the time, at least if you were wealthy, which is, I don't know, somehow it's just ringing for me with all of the ridiculous amounts of money that we're willing to spend on unproven cosmetics to make us look younger. The girls who did these enemas, either for the nobility or for themselves as well, they believed that it would keep their complexion young and dewy. Yeah, so that's a lot of wear and tear. And in fact, Louis's intestines were really, really messed up when he died. They found out. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention about the buff riding boots, those boots eventually, if you follow the history of clothing through time, eventually, evidently became Wellingtons, gumshoes. which I just think is kind of awesome. The word poniard, Poniard. Poniard, we've heard it before. It is a small, slim dagger. There's a reference to the dike at La Rochelle. That's, in more modern terminology, what we would call a seawall. Richelieu had engineers sink a bunch of hulks of ships and weigh them down with rocks. And there is a really amazing painting from the late 1800s of Richelieu on the seawall walking around in La Rochelle, and go take a look at the boots he's wearing. That's all I'm saying. In chapter 15, there is a reference of speaking with the greatest phlegm, which sounds really gross, like hawking up a gob to spit. It's not. It's referring back to the humors. The humors, just to remind you, are choler, melancholy, phlegm, and blood. Phlegm, phlegmatic, is calm, thoughtful, patient. And I think that's probably the word that fits the mood of that part of the story the best. There's a reference to Samson and the Philistines. Trevib feels like Samson among the Philistines. If you remember that Goliath was a Philistine, that helps. Also that Samson just decimated the Philistines. Who were the Philistines? They were probably Greeks. They were definitely from the Aegean. They were living in what was then still part of Israel. And of course, they get a bad rap. In our modern terminology, calling somebody a Philistine is calling them like a big, dumb Goliath, basically. And I found for phlegmatic the humors in a table form, which tells you what their season was and what all these little details about humors. And it's all in a nice little concise, succinct table format. So I've linked out to that for you as well. All right. That is it for your prep. You now know all of the weird, obscure facts that you might come into contact with in these chapters. Let's have at it. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, chapters 14 and 15. If you are listening to the alternate version that is recorded by John Lee, you can come back for the follow-up audio at 1 hour and 17 minutes. All right, here we go.
Chapter 14 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Man of Meung. The crowd was caused, not by the expectation of a man to be hanged, but by the contemplation of a man who was hanged. The carriage, which had been stopped for a minute, resumed its way, passed through the crowd, threaded the Rue Saint-Honore, turned into the Rue des Bons-Enfants, and stopped before a low door. The door opened. 2 guards received Bonacieux in their arms from the officer who supported him. They carried him through an alley, up a flight of stairs, and deposited him in an antechamber. All these movements had been effected mechanically, as far as he was concerned. He had walked as one walks in a dream. He had a glimpse of objects as through a fog. His ears had perceived sounds without comprehending them. He might have been executed at that moment without his making a single gesture in his own defense or uttering a cry to implore mercy. He remained on the bench, with his back leaning against the wall and his hands hanging down, exactly on the spot where the guards placed him. On looking around him, however, as he could perceive no threatening object, as nothing indicated that he ran any real danger, as the bench was comfortably covered with a well-stuffed cushion, as the wall was ornamented with a beautiful Cordova leather, and as large red damask curtains, fastened back by gold clasps, floated before the window, he perceived by degrees that his fear was exaggerated, and he began to turn his head to the right and the left, upward and downward. At this movement, which nobody opposed, he resumed a little courage, and ventured to draw up one leg and then the other. At length, with the help of his 2 hands, he lifted himself from the bench, and found himself on his feet. At this moment, an officer with a pleasant face opened a door, continued to exchange some words with a person in the next chamber, and then came up to the prisoner. "Is your name Bonacieux?" said he.
"Yes, Monsieur Officer,"
stammered the mercer, more dead than alive.
"At your service."
"Come in," said the officer, and he moved out of the way to let the mercer pass. The latter obeyed without reply and entered the chamber where he appeared to be expected. It was a large cabinet, close and stifling, with the walls furnished with arms, offensive and defensive, and in which there was already a fire, although it was scarcely the end of the month of September. A square table covered with books and papers, upon which was unrolled an immense plan of the city of La Rochelle, occupied the center of the room. Standing before the chimney was a man of middle height, of a haughty, proud mien, with piercing eyes, a large brow, and a thin face, which was made still longer by a royal, or imperial as it is now called, surmounted by a pair of mustaches. Although this man was scarcely 36 or 37 years of age, hair, mustaches, and royal all began to be gray. This man, except a sword, had all the appearance of a soldier, and his buff boots, still slightly covered with dust, indicated that he had been on horseback in the course of the day. This man was Armand Jean Duplessis, Cardinal de Richelieu, not such as he is now represented, broken down like an old man, suffering like a martyr, his body bent, his voice failing, buried in a large armchair as in an anticipated tomb, no longer living but by the strength of his genius, and no longer maintaining the struggle with Europe, but by the eternal application of his thoughts, but such as he really was at this period, that is to say, an active and gallant cavalier, already weak of body, but sustained by that moral power which made of him one of the most extraordinary men that ever lived, preparing, after having supported the Duc de Nevers in his duchy of Mantua, after having taken Nimes, Castres, and Uzes, to drive the English from the Isle of Ré and lay siege to La Rochelle. At first sight, nothing denoted the cardinal, and it was impossible for those who did not know his face to guess in whose presence they were. The poor mercer remained standing at the door while the eyes of the personage we have just described were fixed upon him, and appeared to wish to penetrate even into the depths of the past. "Is this that Bonacieux?" asked he after a moment of silence.
"Yes, Monseigneur,"
replied the officer. "That's well. Give me those papers, and leave us." The officer took from the table the papers pointed out, gave them to him who asked for them, bowed to the ground, and retired. Bonacieux recognized in these papers his interrogatories of the Bastille. From time to time, the man by the chimney raised his eyes from the writings and plunged them like poniards into the heart of the poor mercer. At the end of 10 minutes of reading and 10 seconds of examination, the cardinal was satisfied. "That head has never conspired," murmured he, "but it matters not. We will see." "You are accused of high treason," said the cardinal slowly.
"So I have been told already, Monseigneur,"
cried Bonacieux, giving his interrogator the title he had heard the officer give him.
"But I swear to you that I know nothing about it."
The cardinal repressed a smile.
"You have conspired with your wife, with Madame de Chevreuse, and with my Lord Duke of Buckingham." "Indeed, Monseigneur," responded the mercer, "I have heard her pronounce all those names."
"And on what occasion?"
"She said that the Cardinal de Richelieu had drawn the Duke of Buckingham to Paris to ruin him and to ruin the Queen."
"She said that?" cried the cardinal with violence.
"Yes, Monseigneur. But I told her she was wrong to talk about such things, and that His Eminence was incapable."
"Hold your tongue. You are stupid," replied the cardinal.
That's exactly what my wife said, Monseigneur.
Do you know who carried off your wife?
No, Monseigneur.
You have suspicions, nevertheless?
Yes, Monseigneur, but these suspicions appeared to be disagreeable to Monsieur the Commissary, and I no longer have them.
Your wife has escaped. Did you know that?
No, Monseigneur. I learned it since I have been in prison, and that from the conversation of Monsieur the Commissary, an amiable man.
The cardinal repressed another smile. Then you are ignorant of what has become of your wife since her flight.
Absolutely, Monseigneur, but she has most likely returned to the Louvre.
At 1 o'clock this morning she had not returned.
My God! What can have become of her then?
We shall know. Be assured. Nothing is concealed from the cardinal. The cardinal knows everything.
In that case, Monseigneur, do you believe the cardinal will be so kind as to tell me what has become of my wife?
Perhaps he may, but you must, in the first place, reveal to the cardinal all you know of your wife's relations with Madame de Chevreuse.
But, Monseigneur, I know nothing about them. I have never seen her.
When you went to fetch your wife from the Louvre, did you always return directly home?
Scarcely ever. She had business to transact with linen drapers, to whose houses I conducted her.
And how many were there of these linen drapers?
2, Monseigneur.
And where did they live?
One in Rue de Vaugirard, the other Rue de la Harpe.
Did you go into these houses with her?
Never, Monseigneur. I waited at the door.
And what excuse did she give you for entering all alone?
She gave me none. She told me to wait, and I waited.
You are a very complacent husband, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, said the cardinal.
He calls me his dear monsieur,
said the mercer to himself.
Peste, matters are going all right.
Should you know those doors again?
Yes.
Do you know the numbers?
Yes.
What are they?
Number 25 in the Rue de Vaugirard, 75 in the Rue de la Harpe.
That's well, said the cardinal. At these words he took up a silver bell and rang it. The officer entered. Go, said he in a subdued voice, and find Rochefort. Tell him to come to me immediately if he has returned. The count is here, said the officer, and requests to speak with your eminence instantly. Let him come in then, said the cardinal quickly. The officer sprang out to the apartment with that alacrity which all the servants of the cardinal displayed in obeying him.
To your eminence,
murmured Bonacieux, rolling his eyes round in astonishment. 5 seconds has scarcely elapsed after the disappearance of the officer when the door opened and a new personage entered.
It is he!
cried Bonacieux. He? What he? asked the cardinal.
The man who abducted my wife.
The cardinal rang a second time. The officer reappeared. Place this man in the care of his guards again, and let him wait till I send for him.
No, Monseigneur, no, it is not he,
cried Bonacieux.
No, I was deceived. This is quite another man, and does not resemble him at all. Monsieur is, I am sure, an honest man.
Take away that fool, said the cardinal. The officer took Bonacieux by the arm and led him into the antechamber where he found his 2 guards. The newly introduced personage followed Bonacieux impatiently with his eyes till he had gone out, and the moment the door closed, "They have seen each other," said he, approaching the cardinal eagerly. "Who?" asked his eminence. "He and she." "The queen and the duke?" cried Richelieu. "Yes." "Where?" "At the Louvre." "Are you sure of it?" "Perfectly sure." "Who told you of it?" "Madame de Lannoy, who is devoted to your eminence, as you know." "Why did she not let me know sooner?" "Whether by chance or mistrust, the queen made Madame de Surgis sleep in her chamber, and detained her all day." "Well, we are beaten. Now let us try to take our revenge." "I will assist you with all my heart, Monseigneur. Be assured of that." "How did it come about?" "At 12:30, the queen was with her woman." "Where?" "In her bedchamber." "Go on." "When someone came and brought her a handkerchief from her laundress." "And then?" "The queen immediately exhibited strong emotion, and despite the rouge with which her face was covered, evidently turned pale." "And then? And then?" "She then arose, and with altered voice, 'Ladies,' said she, 'wait for me 10 minutes. I shall soon return.' She then opened the door of her alcove and went out." "Why did not Madame de Lannoy come and inform you instantly?" "Nothing was certain. Besides, Her Majesty had said, 'Ladies, wait for me,' and she did not dare to disobey the queen." "How long did the queen remain out of the chamber?" 3/4 of an hour." "None of her women accompanied her?" "Only Donna Estefania." "Did she afterward return?" "Yes, but only to take a little rosewood casket with her cipher upon it, and went out again immediately." "And when she finally returned, did she bring that casket with her?" "No." "Does Madame de Lannoy know what was in that casket?" "Yes, the diamond studs which His Majesty gave the queen." "And she came back without this casket?" "Yes." "Madame de Lannoy, then, is of your opinion that she gave them to Buckingham?" "She is sure of it." "How can she be so?" "In the course of the day, Madame de Lannoy, in her quality of tirewoman of the queen, looked for this casket, appeared uneasy at not finding it, and at length asked information of the queen." "And then the queen?" "The queen became exceedingly red, and replied that having in the evening broken one of those studs, she had sent it to her goldsmith to be repaired." "He must be called upon, and so ascertain if the thing be true or not." "I have just been with him." "And the goldsmith?" "The goldsmith has heard nothing of it." "Well, well, Rochefort, all is not lost, and perhaps everything is for the best." "The fact is that I do not doubt your Eminence's genius." "Will repair the blunders of his agent. Is that it?" "That is exactly what I was going to say, if your Eminence had let me finish my sentence." "Meanwhile, do you know where the Duchess de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham are now concealed?" "No, Monseigneur. My people could tell me nothing on that head." "But I know." "You, Monseigneur?" "Yes, or at least I guess. They were one in the Rue de Vaugirard, number 25, the other in the Rue de la Harpe, number 75. "Does your Eminence command that they both be instantly arrested?" "It will be too late. They will be gone." "But still, we can make sure that they are so." "Take 10 men of my guardsmen, and search the 2 houses thoroughly." Instantly, Monseigneur. And Rochefort went hastily out of the apartment. The cardinal, being left alone, reflected for an instant and then rang the bell a third time. The same officer appeared. "Bring the prisoner in again," said the cardinal. Monsieur Bonacieux was introduced afresh, and upon a sign from the cardinal, the officer retired. "You have deceived me," said the cardinal sternly.
"I,"
cried Bonacieux,
"I deceive your eminence?"
"Your wife, in going to the Rue de Vaugirard and Rue de la Harpe, did not go to find linen drapers."
"Then why did she go? Just God."
"She went to meet the Duchess de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham."
"Yes,"
cried Bonacieux, recalling all his remembrances of the circumstances.
"Yes, that's it. Your eminence is right. I told my wife several times that it was surprising that linen drapers should live in such houses as those, in houses that had no signs. But she always laughed at me. Ah, Monseigneur,"
continued Bonacieux, throwing himself at his eminence's feet.
"Ah, how truly you are the cardinal, the great cardinal, the man of genius whom all the world reveres."
The cardinal, however contemptible might be the triumph gained over so vulgar a being as Bonacieux, did not the less enjoy it for an instant. Then, almost immediately, as if a fresh thought has occurred, a smile played upon his lips, and he said, offering his hand to the mercer, "Rise, my friend. You are a worthy man."
"The cardinal has touched me with his hand. I have touched the hand of the great man,"
cried Bonacieux.
"The great man has called me his friend."
"Yes, my friend, yes," said the cardinal with that paternal tone which he sometimes knew how to assume, but which deceived none who knew him. "And as you have been unjustly suspected, well, you must be indemnified. Here, take this purse of 100 pistoles, and pardon me."
"I pardon you, Monseigneur,"
said Bonacieux, hesitating to take the purse, fearing doubtless that this pretended gift was but a pleasantry.
"But you are able to have me arrested. You are able to have me tortured. You are able to have me hanged. You are the master, and I could not have the least word to say. Pardon you, Monseigneur. You cannot mean that."
"Ah, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, you are generous in the matter. I see it, and I thank you for it. Thus, then you will take this bag, and you will go away, without being too malcontent."
"I go away enchanted."
"Farewell, then, or rather, au revoir."
"Whenever Monseigneur wishes, I shall be firmly at the orders of his eminence."
"That will be often, be assured, for I have found your conversation quite charming."
"Oh, Monseigneur!"
"Au revoir, Monsieur Bonacieux. Au revoir." And the cardinal made him a sign with his hand, to which Bonacieux replied by bowing to the ground. He then went out backward, and when he was in the antechamber, the cardinal heard him in his enthusiasm crying aloud,
"Long life to the Monseigneur! Long life to his eminence! Long life to the great cardinal!"
The cardinal listened with a smile to this vociferous manifestation of the feelings of Monsieur Bonacieux, and then, when Bonacieux's cries were no longer audible, "Good," said he, "that man would henceforward lay down his life for me." And the cardinal began to examine with the greatest attention the map of La Rochelle, which, as we have said, lay open on the desk, tracing with a pencil the line in which the famous dike was to pass, which, 18 months later, shut up the port of the besieged city. As he was in the deepest of his strategic meditations, the door opened, and Rochefort returned. "Well?" said the cardinal eagerly, rising with a promptitude which proved the degree of importance he attached to the commission with which he had charged the count. "Well," said the latter, A young woman of about 26 or 28 years of age, and a man from 35 to 40, have indeed lodged at the two houses pointed out by your eminence, but the woman left last night, and the man this morning."
"It was they!" cried the cardinal, looking at the clock. "And now it is too late to have them pursued. The Duchess is at Tours, and the Duke at Boulogne. It is in London they must be found."
"What are your eminence's orders?"
"Not a word of what has passed. Let the Queen remain in perfect security. Let her be ignorant that we know her secret. Let her believe that we are in search of some conspiracy or other. Send me the keeper of the seals, Ségur."
"And that man? What has your eminence done with him?"
"What man?"
asked the cardinal. "That Bonacieux."
"I have done with him all that could be done. I have made him a spy upon his wife."
The Comte de Rochefort bowed like a man who acknowledges the superiority of the master as great, and retired. Left alone, the cardinal seated himself again and wrote a letter, which he secured with his special seal. Then he rang. The officer entered for the 4th time.
"Tell Vitré to come to me," said he, "and tell him to get ready for a journey."
An instant after, the man he asked for was before him, booted and spurred.
"Vitré," said he, "you will go with all speed to London. You must not stop an instant on the way. You will deliver this letter to Milady. Here is an order for 200 pistoles. Call upon my treasurer and get the money. You shall have as much again if you are back within 6 days and have executed your commission well."
The messenger, without replying a single word, bowed, took the letter with the order for the 200 pistoles, and retired. Here is what the letter contained. "Milady, be at the first ball at which the Duke of Buckingham shall be present. He will wear on his doublet 12 diamond studs. Get as near to him as you can and cut off 2. As soon as these studs shall be in your possession, inform me." End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Men of the Robe and Men of the Sword. On the day after these events had taken place, Athos not having reappeared, M. de Tréville was informed by D'Artagnan and Porthos of the circumstance. As to Aramis, he had asked for leave of absence for 5 days, and was gone, it was said, to Rouen on family business. M. de Tréville was the father of his soldiers. The lowest or the least known of them, as soon as he assumed the uniform of the company, was as sure of his aid and support as if he had been his own brother. He repaired then instantly to the office of the lieutenant criminel. The officer who commanded the post of the Red Cross was sent for, and by successive inquiries they learned that Athos was then lodged in Fort l'Evêque. Athos had passed through all the examinations we have seen Bonacieux undergo. We were present at the scene in which the two captives were confronted with each other. Athos, who had till that time said nothing for fear that D'Artagnan, interrupted in his turn, should not have the time necessary, from this moment declared that his name was Athos, and not D'Artagnan. He added that he did not know either Monsieur or Madame Bonacieux, that he had never spoken to the one or the other, that he had come at about 10 o'clock in the evening to pay a visit to his friend, Monsieur D'Artagnan, but that till that hour he had been at Monsieur de Tréville's, where he had dined. 20 witnesses, added he, could attest the fact. And he named several distinguished gentlemen, and among them was Monsieur le Duc de la Trémouille. The second commissary was as much bewildered as the first had been by the simple and firm declaration of the Musketeer, upon whom he was anxious to take the revenge which men of the robe like at all times to gain over men of the sword. But the name of Monsieur de Tréville and that of Monsieur de la Trémouille commanded a little reflection. Athos was then sent to the cardinal, but unfortunately the cardinal was at the Louvre with the king. It was precisely at this moment that Monsieur de Tréville, on leaving the residence of the lieutenant criminel and the governor of Fort l'Evêque without being able to find Athos, arrived at the palace. As captain of the Musketeers, Monsieur de Tréville had the right of entry at all times. It is well known how violent the king's prejudices were against the queen, and how carefully those prejudices were kept up by the cardinal, who in affairs of intrigue mistrusted women infinitely more than men. One of the grand causes of this prejudice was the friendship of Anne of Austria for Madame de Chevreuse. These two women gave him more uneasiness than the war with Spain, the quarrel with England, or the embarrassment of the finances. In his eyes and to his conviction, Madame de Chevreuse not only served the queen in her political intrigues, but, what tormented him still more, in her amorous intrigues. At the first word the cardinal spoke of Madame de Chevreuse, who, though exiled to Tours and believed to be in that city, had come to Paris, remained there 5 days, and outwitted the police, the king flew into a furious passion. Capricious and unfaithful, the king wished to be called Louis the Just and Louis the Chaste. Posterity will find a difficulty in understanding this character, which history explains only by facts and never by reason. But when the cardinal added that not only Madame de Chevreuse had been in Paris, but still further, that the queen had renewed with her one of those mysterious correspondences which at that time was named a cabal, when he affirmed that he, the cardinal, was about to unravel the most closely twisted thread of this intrigue, that at the moment of arresting in the very act, with all the proofs about her, the queen's emissary to the exiled duchess, a musketeer had dared to interrupt the course of justice violently by falling sword in hand upon the honest men of the law, charged with investigating impartially the whole affair in order to place it before the eyes of the king. Louis XIII could not contain himself, and he made a step toward the queen's apartment with that pale and mute indignation which, when it broke out, led this prince to the commission of the most pitiless cruelty. And yet, in all this, the cardinal had not yet said a word about the Duke of Buckingham. At this instant, Monsieur de Tréville entered, cool, polite, and in irreproachable costume. Informed of what had passed by the presence of the cardinal and the alteration in the king's countenance, Monsieur de Tréville felt himself something like Samson before the Philistines. Louis XIII had already placed his hand on the knob of the door. At the noise of Monsieur de Tréville's entrance, he turned round. "You arrive in good time, monsieur," said the king, who, when his passions were raised to a certain point, could not dissemble. "I have learned some fine things concerning your Musketeers." "And I," said Tréville coldly, "I have some pretty things to tell your majesty concerning these gownsmen." "What?" said the king with hauteur. "I have the honor to inform your majesty," continued Monsieur de Tréville in the same tone, "that a party of procureurs, commissaries, and men of the police, very estimable people, but very inveterate as it appears, against the uniform, have taken upon themselves to arrest in a house, to lead away through the open street, and throw into Fort l'Evêque, all upon an order which they have refused to show me, one of my, or rather, one of your musketeers, sire, of irreproachable conduct, of an almost illustrious reputation, and whom your majesty knows favorably, Monsieur Athos." "Athos?" said the king mechanically. "Yes, certainly I know that name." "Let your majesty remember," said Tréville, "that Monsieur Athos is the musketeer who, in the annoying duel which you are acquainted with, had the misfortune to wound Monsieur de Cahusac so seriously. A propos, monseigneur," continued Tréville, addressing the cardinal, "Monsieur de Cahusac is quite recovered, is he not?" "Thank you," said the cardinal, biting his lips with anger. "Athos, then, went to pay a visit to one of his friends absent at the time," continued Tréville, "to a young Béarnais, a cadet in his majesty's guards, the company of Monsieur Dessessart. But scarcely had he arrived at his friend's and taken up a book,
while waiting his return, when a mixed crowd of bailiffs and soldiers came and laid siege to the house, broke open several doors."
The cardinal made the king a sign which signified, "That was on account of the affair about which I spoke to you." "We all know that," interrupted the king, "for all that was done for our service."
"Then," said Tréville, "it was also for your majesty's service that one of my musketeers, who was innocent, has been seized, that he has been placed between two guards like a malefactor, and that this gallant man, who has 10 times shed his blood in your majesty's service, and is ready to shed it again, has been paraded through the midst of an insolent populace?"
"Bah," said the king, who had begun to be shaken. "Was it so managed?"
"Monsieur de Tréville," said the cardinal with the greatest phlegm, "does not tell your majesty that this innocent musketeer, this gallant man, had only an hour before attacked, sword in hand, 4 commissaries of inquiry who were delegated by myself to examine into an affair of the highest importance." "I defy your eminence to prove it," cried Tréville with his Gascon freedom and military frankness. "For 1 hour before, Monsieur Athos, who, I will confide it to your majesty, is really a man of the highest quality, did me the honor of having dined with me to be conversing in the saloon of my hotel with the Duc de la Trémoille and the Comte de Châlus, who happened to be there."
The king looked at the cardinal.
"A written examination attests it," said the cardinal, replying aloud to the mute interrogation of his majesty, "and the ill-treated people who have drawn up the following, which I have the honor to present to your majesty." "And is the written report of the gownsman to be placed in comparison with the word of honor of a swordsman?"
replied Tréville haughtily. "Come, come, Tréville, hold your tongue," said the king.
"If his eminence entertains any suspicion against one of my musketeers," said Tréville, "the justice of Monsieur the Cardinal is so well known that I demand an inquiry." "In the house in which the judicial inquiry was made," continued the impassive cardinal, "there lodges, I believe, a young Béarnais, a friend of the Musketeer." "Your eminence means Monsieur d'Artagnan?" "I mean a young man whom you patronize, Monsieur de Tréville." "Yes, your eminence, it is the same." "Do you not suspect this young man of having given bad counsel?" "To Athos? To a man double his age?" interrupted Tréville. "No, monseigneur. Besides, D'Artagnan passed the evening with me." "Well," said the cardinal, "everybody seems to have passed the evening with you." "Does your eminence doubt my word?" said Tréville with a brow flushed with anger. "No, God forbid," said the cardinal. "Only at what hour was he with you?" "Oh, as to that I can speak positively, your eminence, for as he came in I remarked that it was but 9:30 by the clock, although I had believed it to be later." "At what hour did he leave your hotel?" "At 10:30, an hour after the event." "Well," replied the cardinal, who could not for an instant suspect the loyalty of Tréville, and who felt that the victory was escaping him. "Well, but Athos was taken in the house in the Rue des Fossoyeurs." "Is one friend forbidden to visit another, or a musketeer of my company to fraternize with a guard of Dessessart's company?" "Yes, when the house where he fraternizes is suspected." "That house is suspected, Tréville," said the king. "Perhaps you did not know it." "Indeed, sire, I did not. The house may be suspected, but I deny that it is so in the part of it inhabited by Monsieur d'Artagnan, for I can affirm, sire, if I can believe what he says, that there does not exist a more devoted servant of your majesty or a more profound admirer of Monsieur the Cardinal.
Was it not this D'Artagnan who wounded Jussac one day in that unfortunate encounter which took place near the convent of the Carmes Déchaussés? Asked the king, looking at the cardinal, who colored with vexation.
And the next day, Bernajoux. Yes, sire, yes, it is the same, and your majesty has a good memory.
Come, how shall we decide? Said the king. That concerns your majesty more than me, said the cardinal. I should affirm the culpability.
And I deny it, said Tréville. But his majesty has judges, and these judges will decide.
That is best, said the king. Send the case before the judges. It is their business to judge, and they shall judge.
Only, replied Tréville, it is a sad thing that in the unfortunate times in which we live, the purest life, the most incontestable virtue, cannot exempt a man from infamy and persecution. The army, I will answer for it, will be but little pleased on being exposed to rigorous treatment on account of police affairs.
The expression was imprudent, but Monsieur de Tréville launched it with knowledge of his cause. He was desirous of an explosion, because in that case the mind throws forth fire, and fire enlightens.
Police affairs?
Cried the king, taking up Tréville's words.
Police affairs? And what do you know about them, monsieur? Meddle with your musketeers, and do not annoy me in this way. It appears, according to your account, that if by mischance a musketeer is arrested, France is in danger. What a noise about a musketeer! I would arrest 10 of them, ventrebleu, 100, even all the company, and I would not allow a whisper.
From the moment they are suspected by your majesty, said Tréville, the musketeers are guilty. Therefore you see me prepared to surrender my sword, for after having accused my soldiers, there can be no doubt that Monsieur the Cardinal will end by accusing me. It is best to constitute myself at once a prisoner with Athos, who is already arrested, and with D'Artagnan, who most probably will be.
Gascon-headed man, will you have done?
Said the king.
Sire,
replied Tréville without lowering his voice in the least,
either order my musketeer to be restored to me, or let him be tried.
He shall be tried,
said the cardinal.
Well, so much the better, for in that case I shall demand of his majesty permission to plead for him.
The king feared an outbreak.
If his eminence,
said he,
did not have personal motives.
The cardinal saw what the king was about to say and interrupted him.
Pardon me, said he, but the instant your majesty considers me a prejudiced judge, I withdraw.
Come,
said the king,
will you swear by my father that Athos was at your residence during the event, and that he took no part in it?
By your glorious father, and by yourself, whom I love and venerate, above all the world, I swear it. Be so kind as to reflect, sire, said the cardinal. If we release the prisoner thus, we shall never know the truth. Athos may always be found, replied Tréville, ready to answer when it shall please the gownsmen to interrogate him. He will not desert, Monsieur the Cardinal, be assured of that. I will answer for him.
No, he will not desert,
said the king.
He can always be found, as Tréville says. Besides,
added he, lowering his voice and looking with a suppliant air at the cardinal,
let us give them apparent security. That is policy.
This policy of Louis XIII made Richelieu smile.
Order it as you please, sire. You possess the right of pardon. The right of pardoning only applies to the guilty, said Tréville, who was determined to have the last word. And my musketeer is innocent. It is not mercy, then, that you are about to accord, sire. It is justice.
And he is in the Fort l'Evêque, said the king.
Yes, sire, in solitary confinement in a dungeon, like the lowest criminal.
The devil, murmured the king. What must be done?
Sign an order for his release, and all will be said, replied the cardinal. I believe with your majesty that Monsieur de Tréville's guarantee is more than sufficient.
Tréville bowed very respectfully, with a joy that was not unmixed with fear. He would have preferred an obstinate resistance on the part of the cardinal to this sudden yielding. The king signed the order for release, and Tréville carried it away without delay. As he was about to leave the presence, the cardinal gave him a friendly smile and said, "A perfect harmony reigns, sire, between the leaders and the soldiers of your musketeers, which must be profitable for the service and honorable to all."
He will play me some dog's trick or other, and that immediately, said Tréville. One has never the last word with such a man. But let us be quick. The king may change his mind in an hour, and at all events it is more difficult to replace a man in the Fort l'Evêque or the Bastille who has got out, than to keep a prisoner there who is in.
Monsieur de Tréville made his entrance triumphantly into the Fort l'Evêque, whence he delivered the musketeer whose peaceful indifference had not for a moment abandoned him. The first time he saw D'Artagnan,
"You have come off well," said he to him. "There is your Jussac thrust paid for. There still remains that of Bernajoux, but you must not be too confident."
As to the rest, Monsieur de Tréville had good reason to mistrust the cardinal, and to think that all was not over, for scarcely had the captain of the musketeers closed the door after him, than his Eminence said to the king, "Now that we are at length by ourselves, we will, if your majesty pleases, converse seriously. Sire, Buckingham has been in Paris 5 days, and only left this morning." End of section 15, recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.
I thought it was fascinating that Dumas pointed out to us that Richelieu had not mentioned Buckingham until the very, very last sentence of this chapter. He is, again, like I said before, such a tactician. He knew who he was talking to and how to play him like a cheap violin, which doesn't mean that they weren't a good team, or at least an effective team. It just means Richelieu definitely knew what he was doing. And again, I loved some of the humor in these chapters. When the mercer says, "That's the man who abducted my wife," and then Richelieu's like, "Take him back to the prison." No, I was wrong. That wasn't the guy at all. I totally made a mistake. I don't recognize this guy. Bertha Ding Dong, you can let me stay. I loved that. I also loved Richelieu saying to him, "Hold your tongue, you're stupid." That's exactly what my wife said. God. Dumas, when he gets going. I also thought that the scene between Richelieu and Rochefort was interesting because Richelieu cuts Rochefort off at one point and interrupts him. Rochefort comes back with a clapback. That's exactly what I was going to say, if you would let me finish my sentence. And I'll tell you, I checked in both versions, the Victorian version that's on LibriVox and the New Modern Translation, those two sections, those jokes were translated the same way in both texts, which I thought was kind of cool. Because that means that the jokes were there from the beginning. Alrighty, I wanted to announce patrons who joined us in June. So big thanks to Michelle S., Claire W., Candace F., Kim F., and Jean B. Thank you so much for your support, especially right now when this is pretty much the only work I can manage to do. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you all so much. And I'll talk to you guys next week. You take care. Have a good one. Be well. Bye. A big thanks to all the CraftLit listeners who support the show by being a premium audio member via craftlit.com/premium or via patreon.com/craftlit. Your support for the show is what's kept us going since 2006. If you feel like getting free audio pretty much every week, please consider supporting the show by heading over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledging what you feel the show is worth to you. If you can't support the show that way, consider leaving a review at iTunes or at our facebook.com/craftlit page, or follow @craftlit on Twitter and share the show with your followers too. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.